Good evening, and welcome to our third episode on this webinar series. I would just like to remind everyone who's joining us that we are recording this session for future sharing on social media platforms. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Dawra Madwarna is a platform of interdisciplinary individuals, and we are working voluntarily to drive the transformation of public space for a more sustainable future, as you were seeing in our rolling slideshow in the beginning. And primarily, we aim to do this by adopting a people-centered placemaking approach. So my name is Sarah Scheiber. I'm one of the co-founders of Dawra Madwarna, and together with me, I have my co-host Wendy Jo Mifsud, and besides being part of the Dawra Madwarna core team, we are also lecturers at university, and we are coordinating this webinar series together in collaboration with the University of Malta. Just maybe some technical aspects, if you hear a voice every now and again, we've decided to hold this webinar as a meeting so that we can all see the participants who are present and also the panelists. So if you will be joining, please just mute your mics straight away. The third episode today, if I will just start screen sharing again for this. Okay, so the third episode today will be exploring the potential for communities and local councils or regional councils to work together towards the creation of green open spaces. We will be discussing local and international case studies and the obstacles they have encountered, trying to understand how such grassroots initiatives can be supported, and also how co-governance can be an important mechanism for driving and creating change. So in fact, as I was mentioning, this is part of a series of webinars centered around the idea of green open space networks, which basically comes from a position paper, which we wrote. The first episode was on the idea of proactive planning, looking at how that can drive change. The second episode looked at the social benefits of such open space networks and the potential role of citizen engagement in driving such change. Now, an important part of moving towards green space networks is, in fact, trying to recreate space, or maybe reallocating space as public space as an important first step. And so this requires change. And for such change to happen, usually it means engaging with the community. So working together, the idea of collaboration, and this is where the idea of co-governance comes in. So potentially not just having grassroots initiatives. Over here you can see the spectrum of governance, the idea of governance, where on the one hand you have grassroots initiatives such as non-government-led approaches, and on the other hand, government-led approaches. But then there is this somewhere in between where citizens or citizen organizations can work together with, say, local councils or regional councils or even authorities to develop projects which are more collaborations, joint initiatives. And this is what we are going to be exploring today. So the agenda is as follows. I will be doing a very brief introduction to introduce our panelists, and then there will be a case study presentation by our international guest speaker on the Piazze Aperte program in Milan. Finally, there will be the panel discussion, and then there will be some time for questions and discussion with the audience. So I'd like to move on to introducing our panel for today. First up, we have Zoe J. Fletcher. Zoe J. is an environment officer for the Port Regional Council, which covers the localities of Valletta, Floriana, Paula, Isla, Birgu, Kalkara, Shaira, Zabbar, Fura, and Tarshin. Having graduated with a master's in aquaculture and experienced working for the Scottish Environment Protection Agency on sector regulation planning, one of the core elements of Zoe J's current work in the Port Regional Council is the development of a regional greening roadmap, the aims of which are to increase collaboration between local councils, help improve the accessibility, impact, and longevity of environmental projects, and ultimately develop a green corridor plan to improve and promote cycling and pedestrian access to cultural heritage sites and open spaces across the region. Next, we have Camille Bon, who is the lead project manager of Project Eagle Foundation. One of the most recent projects of the Project Eagle Foundation is the Safe Routes to School project, which aims to promote walking to school as a form of daily exercise and an alternative to the private car. So a network of streets within a 1 kilometer radius around the school has been identified as walking routes for children and parents to use daily. The routes target students excluded from free public transport scheme in order to reduce the use of private vehicles around the school. And so 3 parts were brought to life with colorful floor markings on the pavement and also signage to create more awareness on active travel for short distance trips. We also have Jacques Bourge-Barthé with us, who is Director of Practice at AP Valletta. Jacques was involved with Play Space, which is a project which develops new narratives for public space. It was a Valletta 2018 and a Valletta Design Cluster event, which was developed and delivered by Valletta-based creative studios We Live Here and AP Valletta, in consultation with Invisible Playground in Berlin, and also the Sicignano Local Council and the Sicignano Local Council for Children. They believe that in a society which faces more and more pressures on public space, the need to consider its importance for recreation and encounter has become more urgent than ever. And so this workshop was conceived and designed to allow children to experience the negotiation and decision-making processes that take place in communities, and to reconsider the use of public space. This experience aimed to give them the opportunity to ask themselves what public space is, and to imagine in teams what that public space, which is currently used for parking cars, could be. So this workshop was intended as a pioneer for a wider project intended to raise the awareness amongst young and also older citizens as to the importance of public space within local communities. We also have Brian Magro with us, who is a qualified social worker and educator. He has been involved in various government and EU-funded youth projects, and he is currently Director of the Planning Development Office of the Salesians of Don Bosco in Malta and Secretary of the Don Bosco Foundation. The Don Bosco Foundation is currently working to create a multifunctional space for youths, where education and spirituality takes place with the aim to explore, experiment, and invest in a healthy, sustainable society in Malta. They believe that children and youths are disconnected from nature more than ever. And at the same time, the pandemic has shown us how important it is to be connected with nature for our well-being and health. So to address current urban challenges in Malta, they really feel that efforts need to be increased. And so by creating a green and sustainable space for innovation, experimentation, and creativity, this will help to make sustainability more tangible, accessible, and fun. So one of their next steps is, in fact, to renovate one of their facilities in a rural area and turn it into a green living hub. And it would be a place for young people to actively research, experiment, and practice sustainable living with their peers. And after that, share the knowledge which they gain with local communities, schools, and families. And so these facilities will have various, a retreat room for lectures and workshops, an educational organic garden, for example, and other facilities to promote nature and being in touch with nature. Lastly, I'd like to introduce our international guest panelist, Giulia, Giulia Sicignano. Giulia is originally based in Milan as an architect and urban planner. She has always had a passion for themes such as collective life, mobility, and discovering different ways space is experienced and used. And she has been working for AMAT, which is the Agenzia Mobilità Ambiente e Territorio in Milan, since 2019 as an advisor. This agency specializes in topics such as mobility, design, and climate in urban developments. And here she works within the team to design and coordinate urban development and renewal with the aim of promoting street life through its focus on the human dimension. Since September 2021, she has also found her way to STIPO, which is a multidisciplinary urban development team based in Amsterdam and Athens and Placemaking Europe. And since then, a fruitful collaboration has developed which is leading to the creation of Stipo in Italy. So now at this point, I would like to hand over to Giulia, who is going to be giving her presentation about the Piazze Aperte program in Milan. And following that, we will move on to questions and discussion between all the panelist members on all these different projects. So thank you, Giulia.
Thank you, Sarah, and good evening, everyone. And thanks again for the invitation. So I will share with you the presentation, so it's easier to understand. And as Sarah said, today I will talk to you about the Piazze Aperte project in the city of Milan. And it's basically a citywide placemaking strategy that has been carried out by the municipality of Milan, AMAT, the agency where I work, in collaboration with Bloomberg Associates, Global Design Cities Initiatives, and NACTO. And all the interventions that we will see, that I will show you, they comes into a bigger vision for the city of Milan that has been strategized for the new territorial government plan for the city, with some specific goals, even for the very closest future, so for 2030. And all these goals basically come from what we all are experiencing all around the world, I would say. That is going from a way of planning the city that was basically car-centered to a way of planning the city that is people-centered. So we really want to create spaces for people to stay together and to be resilient and sustainable. And what is really important is that we are pursuing that the space, the public space, has to be a common good for everyone. And for the project that we have been following, the practical tool that we focused on was the tactical intervention. There is basically a way of working on public space that is cheaper, faster, and lighter, because it's based on removable tools, and I will show you now some toolkit in order to make you see in a practical way how does it work. And all these interventions comes into new projects priorities that we all want to focus on. And if we really want to have communities inside a place and that the community really feels that they have the ownership of the space, we need to take into considerations a lot of aspects. Some of them are the aspects that are highlighted here. Of course, first of all, the importance of the green spaces and the resilience, the creation of protected and safe areas where people can feel safe from cars, for example, or really highlight the active fronts and the ground floors that are the most important way in which we experience the city, and create spaces that are versatile for different uses, and etc. And so the toolkit could be really simple. So maybe could be only paint on the floor. It's a very colorful and effective way to show to the citizens, the communities, that something happened to a place and that you really want to bring life there. And if you call also an artist to do that, then you have some interventions of asphalt art. And you can also use bollards and curbs in a removable way in order to create new pedestrian areas. For example, here in the picture, all the areas that you see, previously they were a big intersection. It was very unsafe. And then with the Piazze Aperte, we managed to make it safer and also to have much more pedestrian area than before. Then Of course, when you have the new pedestrian areas, you want to have life inside. So you really need to use urban furniture like benches, ping pong and game tables, because playing in public space, it's something that we really should focus on. Picnic tables, or also you can also use some potted plants, because the other side of using a tactical intervention is that, for example, you can't remove the ground and plant directly inside. So if you want to have some green and some shadow and etc., then you can still use potted plants in order to achieve that. But the most important tool of everyone, of everything that we saw, is the participation. Because if you create a new space, a new place, and no one really feels safe, or no one really wants to go there because they feel that you didn't answer to their need, then the place is not successful, of course. And in our case, the bureaucratic tools that we used to create all these intervention was the collaboration pact, which is basically an agreement between the municipality and the community, where both sides announce that they want to take care of a place. And for example, maybe the municipality can give some furniture, or can help the community to develop a project for example, maybe the community can organize an event and they don't have to pay the taxes for the event. But on the other side, the community really needs to commit on making the place very successful, maybe organizing also a calendar of events that comes into the collaboration pacts itself. And so you can, for example, this is also a Piazze Aperte, and in winter you can put this ice ring, so children can go there, and it can be activated even during winter, for example. And so all these elements came together into the Piazze Aperte program. And after 2 pilot interventions, the municipality published a public notice where basically they were asking to anyone in the city to propose a place in order to make it a new square, a new Piazza Aperta. And in 2 months, we received 65 proposals, which was huge, because and also for every proposal, they were very big groups of people participating. They were maybe associations, universities, committee, and etc. And we also organized a public event in order to show the results of the public notice and to have our first conversations with all the people that participated. And then we started to work on different interventions. Unfortunately, we need to create some priorities, because 65 was really a lot, and we are still working on that. But the good part is that we could go from a situation like this, where this is the center of the neighborhood, there is the church, but at the same time, there is no public space, no people anywhere. Go into the co-design phase with the inhabitants. And I don't know, for example, the school that was very close, we talked with the teachers, with the parents of the children, we talked with the priest of the church and all the stakeholders of the area. We co-designed with them the best way to create a new square, then the implementation. And in the end, with a very fast intervention, a very cheap one, we managed to create a new square. And the intervention was monitored after, and since it was successful, we managed to put that interventions into the priorities for the municipality in the next 3 years. And now the structural intervention has been developed, and now it's under construction. So we came from a parking lot, and now we will have a new square. And here there are some pictures of before and afters. Also, this square is under construction now, and it's going to be permanent. And in all the process, it's really important to have the coloring phase together, for example, because when people meet all together to color the ground and everything, they really take ownership of the place. They really feel that this is their square. And at the same time, it's also very important to have a big inauguration event if COVID allows. And because in this way, you can show to everyone, not only the people who participated in the design phase, but to the entire neighborhood, for example, that there is a new place and there is a new space for them to organize events, being together, and etc. And then, of course, as I said before, the activation program is also really important, because then you have the new square, but you really want that people feel that they can leave the square every day, and they are stimulated to do that. So from 2018 till now, we have managed to implement more than 35 interventions in the city. And here you can see the interventions are mostly in the peripheral areas, because we really wanted to create new public space there. The center probably has already is already okay. And this is another example of how we are trying to create livable public space. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Giulia. I think that's very inspiring. You know, one of the nice things about this webinar for me is to see so many different types of projects where you have an element of, you know, either, you know, a grassroots initiative, a community initiative, or some project, you know, coming together and trying to do something different. And this is what we would like to very much discuss. So in fact, some of the first questions which I have, and here I will invite the panelists to, you know, answer in relation to their individual projects, and maybe trying to draw parallels, you know, and trying to with each other. So one of the first questions which we have is, first of all, to understand a bit more how in your individual projects the community and local councils, you know, in the local but also were involved. So how did they come together? How did that process work? And in relation to that, what is the potential so for local councils or even regional councils and community organizations or grassroots initiatives to work together? I don't know who would like to start off. Maybe I'll invite some, maybe Camille, you can explain to us in the Safe Routes to School how you started working with both, you know, the community and the local council to get this project going.
Actually, I mean, like the Safe Routes to School actually started because at PIF we had one of my colleagues, she was a mother and she was walking to school, and this is something, she was a need that she really wanted to improve a walking experience. So we kind of write this project to we propose, I mean, so we write a little brief of this project and we proposed it to different local councils, and the local council of Nasha was the first one to answer back to us. And they were very supportive with this idea because that was something that they wanted to improve. I mean, they wanted to improve their local community, improving like the locality of Nasha, and also the school as well. So the school already did like previous initiatives, kind of, they have like bring your two wheels to school. So for example, so this was kind of a way to bridge between and making it more permanent. So how can we improve and make it, you know, more visible for more visible, like the pathway for the parents that walks to school already. So for us, like the local council and the school in this case were two main key stakeholders, and obviously the parents and the child.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else? So I don't know, maybe Jacques, in your case, yes. I mean, how did the project start off? You know, where did the initiative come?
Well, it was actually kind of two strands which we brought together. On the one hand, we'd been approached, I think at the time, by Valletta 2018 through We Live Here to collaborate on an urban project, on an urban space project. And I think the local council of Sicignano had spoken to me about sort of, okay, look, you know, what do we do with this square? There's a lot of debate and sort of, can you give us some advice? And it seemed like a good opportunity to bring the two together at the time. I think the council was also very receptive, so that was great. And the really intriguing thing was that they actually had a local council for children. So then it made, in that sense, okay. I mean, one of the things that always impresses me is that if we want to change mindsets, you know, when we wanted to, for example, combat smoking in Malta, we started, you know, we really worked very hard, I think, with children in schools, you know, to make it clear to them that smoking is not good. And in that sense, I think if we want to make improvements with public space outlooks, then we should really also make it clear to children that what they take for granted as the way public space is, or that the street is not only a route for cars, but is also a public space. We should also start with kids. So that was a great opportunity in that sense to bring those two together. And the fact that they had a local council for children, we could bring the children on board in the development of the process early on, I think made that very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And in your case, Brian, because obviously with your case, it's obviously it's one of your sites, so you're developing it, but have you had to work with either the council or other authorities, or the kind of support that you've had, or how have you worked together, and also possibly with the community? Have you already started working with different communities?
Yes, on our part, in our project, we have two realities. We're developing or removing the development and investing in more nature and giving an area back to nature. At one point, this area belonged to nature. There was development in it, and we're removing some of the development, putting back a nature and keeping very small spaces. And the small spaces, the small build spaces, will be in a sustainable model. But the way we work is, first of all, we are using the European Solidarity Corps, which is an EU-funded project. We have asked volunteers to join us in this project. One volunteer came and spent a year in Malta and helping us to plan this and develop the idea. And in this development, we started communities of young people, and we also consulted with many stakeholders about how we should develop the program. So when it comes to the communities, we have developed what now we call Toloka. It's a North Slavic word. Toloka means the community coming together and creating something together for each other. So we're using actually this word to describe our community, which we are forming of young people. And they are involved also in the design. We have obviously had to consult with authorities. We had to consult with experts. We had to consult with professionals. And now we have developed the concept and also the plans, which have now been approved. And we also have worked with government to help us to fund this project. So mainly that is the involvement of trying to involve and trying to create a community around this project.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Zoe over here as well. With regards to the like say the regional councils, right? I mean, do you feel, so you mentioned, you know, in your work at regional council, obviously one of the things is this idea of greening. How do you think sort of such, let's say, smaller initiatives and such smaller interventions or trying to change use of public space can try to support that program? Do you think there is potential potential for more collaboration or working together in the process, in the co-creation stage sort of thing? Or what can you?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm really glad you asked, because one of the things that I'm wanting to include in the regional greening roadmap is a lot of my work right now is meeting local councils and NGOs and communities and connecting them. And I want this, my ambition is for this to become a more organic process that happens sort of on its own without me needing to facilitate it so much. Because I think it really is important that when the local councils are undertaking projects, that they do give the community opportunity to take ownership of it themselves, because it makes there have been some great examples within the region where communities have been given ownership over projects, and those projects have been great successes as a result of that, and then the projects have become almost sort of self-sustaining because the community have been given ownership of it. So I think it's really, really, really important to have these collaborations, especially nowadays when it comes to open space, because a discussion that I've had with a local council recently was all about how people will appropriate space, how they see fit. You know, if you provide a space and you don't give people something to do within that space, or you don't direct them on how to utilize that space, they will appropriate it for themselves. When, for example, like if you create an event space and you don't have events going on there, people will still utilize that space, but they will utilize it in ways that they see fit, which is, you know, the local council has an opportunity to make something organized in order to kind of, I think it's really important in the sort of COVID recovery to reconnect people. And I think local councils can play a big role in that with the way that they are utilizing their open spaces as well and designing their open spaces.
Okay, so yeah, I just want to go to Giulia, because one of the questions which comes to mind when I see sort of the presentation, it's very inspiring, you know, and you see, we almost see sort of, we see the start of even what, say, you know, Camille and even what Jacques did with the starting to try to use space in a different way, but actually really taking it through to seeing a lot of spaces, a lot of interventions, and then the idea of taking it through to even a permanent phase. So really changing the way that space is used. But I guess the question I have is, you know, how did it all start? I mean, how did you know that people would be, or why do you think people were interested and then came out in such an interesting way, you know, when there was this call for spaces? How did it start, and why do you think they were actually interested to have this change in sort of, you know, in reallocation of space or using space in this way and challenge the way that we currently use space at the moment in our urban centers?
Well, I think that everything started as a test. There was kind of, as I said, the municipality had the vision, the strategy on working on public space, connecting communities, etc. But it's very easy to give the strategy, but then when you want to really put in practice the goals that you have only as a vision, of course, it's complicated, and then you need to understand what is the best tool to do that. And in that case, the tactical was a really useful way, because it was cheap and fast. So for the municipality was basically no cost almost. And so it started with two interventions. They said, okay, well, let's try. If it doesn't work, we can still go back to where we were. We can still put the parking lots back to how it was. And then the two interventions had very strong resonance in the city, in the people, and people started to ask for that, to see the benefits of having this kind of interventions. And then we also started to think, well, maybe we can just ask to the people with the public notice. If no one answered, okay, they don't care about it probably, or it's not a successful strategy. But if they answer, then it's gonna be successful and we can work it out together. And then they received all these proposals, and then was a big like positive result from the people. And so I think it was a very let's try process. And because everything was a test, and then the tests were good, and then good and good again, and it developed more and more. So I think it was really, let's try, and we'll see.
Right, yeah. And maybe taking, one of the points you said was, okay, it was complicated, we said it was complicated, but then we said, okay, let's try, let's see. I mean, if I take that, I'm sure even the other, the other projects that we have locally, I mean, we spoke, okay, the first question we did was, how did you work together? And obviously, the projects are done now. So obviously it was successful, something was done, and you worked with the local councils and the community. But I mean, clearly there must have been obstacles, there must have been difficulties, along the way. What were those difficulties? Maybe I can ask now the local projects. What obstacles did you find? What difficulties did you have to overcome? And how did you overcome them, sort of? What can we take away from your experiences?
Yeah, there were many obstacles, of course. And I think from both sides. So there were obstacles for the citizens, for the people who were working on the Piazze Aperte, and then also in the municipality itself, because of course also the municipality, it's kind of organic world. So not everyone was convinced about using the tactical intervention, because, okay, they are cheaper, faster, and lighter, but you also need more maintenance, for example. And if you put the paint on the ground, then you need to repaint maybe every year. So you really need to have a big engagement of the community in order to make the intervention successful. And also it was very innovative way of working on the public space. So there were some, even people in the municipality, they were a bit not convinced about it. And on the other side, doing this kind of intervention, of course, in a vision of having a city that is more and more people-centered and not car-centered, of course, includes that in order to create pedestrian area, then probably you will need to remove parking lots, you will need to close some streets. And some people are very positive in that, because they wanted so much that they worked together, and they painted on the ground to achieve that. But there were a lot of other people that really didn't want that. They were really, really against. And I think for the both sides of these kind of issues, the solution was every time testing. So to the people in the municipality that were not convinced, we said, well, let's try. If it doesn't work, no problem. We can still go back, and then maybe we can plan a structural intervention as you like, no problem. On the other side, also to the people that were against that, we said exactly the same. Just try. If you are really convinced after, I don't know, 5 months that the intervention is not really, that doesn't benefit at all to you, then we can talk together and we can find a solution. And in the end, the results, the data, all the monitoring that we are doing, all of these things show that people are really satisfied and are they really appreciate much more having a public space under their house instead of having a parking lot. Most of them, of course, there are still people that are not convinced, but most of them, they are happy about it.
Okay, we have I'm seeing, we do have a question in the chat, but before we come to it for Giulia, specifically on this idea of tactical urbanism, but maybe before we come to it, I'd like to see what were the kind of obstacles that we came across, sort of maybe with the routes to school, or even Jacques using the parking spaces in the, in the Sicignano Piazza locally, sort of. What obstacles did you find kind of resistance, and did you have to sort of overcome resistance in your projects?
Okay, so if I can start with, or Jacques, I don't know if you want to start. Okay, so if I can start with like the safe routes to school, I think like the very vision of this project was to do something similar of what you show us, Giulia, to paint on the streets, to do like something very visible. And actually Steve Montebello, who is also in the audience and who was like the urban planner who helped us a lot in this project. So we wanted to do so to add like crossings, because something what we realized is around the school, so we were missing crossings. But then, so I think like the difference with Milan is like the local councils, they don't have so much authority. And so if we wanted to add crossings, so we cannot paint on the floor and we don't have, I think we didn't have this framework to say, okay, so if I want to paint the crossings, like the local council couldn't authorize it because they are not responsible for the streets. So we need to ask Transport Malta, and Transport Malta is like the big authority for transport. And then asking them is like a full process. And then this is how and I think the main obstacle in Malta is when you have grassroots initiatives and you want to have like, you have like citizens activism that really want to do something, and the bureaucracy of planning a city with like the traffic and everything. So then at the end, I mean, we said, and then even like just adding a crossing, I mean, say, okay, let's not do this. I mean, because it seems like too complicated, and also because it was a project, so we have a time frame, and this couldn't fit in the time frame that we have. So we have to just do things on the pavement, because the pavement at least was under the responsibility of the local councils. But then like the impact that you can have is less, we are less visible, it's, less, it's less visible. And also, so I think, and also parking, I think in Malta, I think parking is also a big issue. Everyone, when you mention that you want to do something, even if it's for kids, even if you want to change something, everyone is like the first thing from the school, from the local council, from the citizens is, are you touching about parking? What are you going to do about parking? Because, like the citizens are, so they don't want, I mean, we would like to remove parking, but, the residents, they don't want this. And still, I mean, people complaining for parking are still the loudest voice in Malta. They are like the more vocals, and we only hear them. We don't hear the child that want to walk to school, that want to walk independently to school, and they are not allowed because parents are afraid of the cars and they are afraid of the people parking everywhere because they want to park very close to their shops or to their house. So I think, I mean, this is, I mean, and this let's try, I think this is, even if we want to do like this let's try, I think, I mean, and this is my personal opinion, I think this is even if people don't get it, like the let's try, I think that when they think about like a change in infrastructure, they think this is going to be permanent. So it's hard to say, just let's try it. I mean, this is just paint on the floor. I mean, if it's such a big deal, I mean, we just remove this paint. And I think this is like maybe this education that we just need, and maybe to be a little bit brave to say, okay, more to test out. And I think so far in Malta, we have, I mean, I don't think that we have, I mean, the slow street is going to these good directions for this. And I think this could maybe change slowly the perception on let's remove one parking space at the time.
And in fact, I think you're addressing two things here, Camille. In fact, one of them is parking, and maybe we'll get to that and even discuss with Jacques, because you tried to do this temporarily. But the first was this tactical urbanism and this painting on space, which is not just playgrounds. And in fact, Steve's question, first question is sort of in Milan with regards to planning permits and processes, right? What kind of permits permits did you have to get for temporary and semi-permanent interventions in Milan? Is there a process in place for carrying out tactical urbanism interventions? Or, you know, because you told us, you said, okay, we did the temporary, we did the paint on the ground, and then we did the full permit, and when it worked, we monitored, and then we did the full permit to get, you know, and now it's going to be a permanent intervention. So when you did the first steps of tactical urbanism, what kind of process is there in Milan? Is there a specific, an easier process or planning permitting process that allows you to do that? How is it easy?
It's easy. It's a
easy
tricky word. No, let's say it depends a lot if the area is already pedestrianized or if it's not already pedestrianized. If it's already a pedestrian area, for example, a park or a square that is not very used and it's underused or has some problem, then we only needed the collaboration pact for people to stay there and act on the public space as it was their public space. So in that case, it was easy, let's say. But if we wanted to create a new pedestrian area, then there was a long dialogue with the mobility department, and with them we needed to co-create the design in order to make it safe, and for all the decisions that have been made also on reducing the parking lot, or I don't know, if we wanted to pedestrianize a road, a street, of course, this intervention affects all the traffic system in the entire neighborhood. And for every interventions we had in our agency where I work for, some modelists that were basically calculating on softwares if the intervention was sustainable or if it wasn't. And if it was sustainable, then we could prove to the mobility sector that the intervention could have been carried out in a sustainable way, in this sense. And then they made like a deliberation of pedestrianize. So they were signing that the new area was fully pedestrian for them. And after the new area was made pedestrian, then we could sign the collaboration pact.
Okay.
I don't know if that was clear.
Yeah, there had to be a process of reallocating space as pedestrian prior to being able to go in with the tactical intervention.
Yeah, exactly.
Wendy, I was going to go on to the parking. Wendy, I'm not sure.
Because speaking of success, Maria has asked whether there are any indicators for success, so that in Malta we can build upon our experience of the projects that we're hearing about this evening, but even your success story. So she's asking here, you know, is it communities with young children? Are these places always close to landmarks like schools or churches? Is there a certain level of education overall in the community which you feel can achieve more success? Which indicators have you observed overall the course of these 35 projects that you can say, look, this helps in this case?
Yeah, for sure. Working near to schools, it's a very important theme. Also because it's easier to convince people that you are creating a new pedestrian areas in front of a school, because you can immediately understand what's the advantage. I mean, you are protecting the kids, and it's really easy also to get consent also from people that maybe are a bit undecided about it. Or at the same time, it's really important to understand what are the attractor points in the neighborhoods. So maybe there were some neighborhoods without a square, but with the areas that were full of commercial places, social services, or the church or supermarket. And if they were all like very close and center in a specific place, probably that place could have been a good piazza, because people could go there for a reason and also wanted to stay there. And another thing I think is really important to have a group of communities that are very diverse, because it happened maybe I remember a proposal for the Piazza Aperte that was specifically carried out by an association of elderly people. And of course, they had some specific needs for the piazza and etc. But their needs were very different from the needs of young people, for example. And in that case was we needed to facilitate a lot, all the different groups to be together. And while in the proposals where the groups were already very different between each other, then it was much easier. And also, if you have like a very diverse group, you will ensure life in the morning because there will be the elderly people, and then in the afternoon because there will be the children, and then in the evening because there will be I don't know, like a concert for young people. So I think it's really important to have like to try at least to address at more diverse like categories. It's a bit not a, I don't know. I think you understood.
Yes, bring different user groups together, definitely. And if I had to go back to your experience, Jack, with, I mean, one of the things so we mentioned was actually trying to, okay, so we're there with sort of putting paint on the ground in a already pedestrian area. And the question is, how do we start to reclaim maybe even space, even temporarily from, or for tactical from parking areas? And you obviously did this in a very temporary, you know, a morning session. I mean, what was your feeling? Do you think that such interventions leave a sense of, you know, yes, let's do this more often, let's do this, you know, maybe and leave it there, I don't know, let's do this every Sunday, or let's leave it there for a week? Do you think it can help to try and upscale, or what sort of then support systems would you need to try and do that more?
Okay, no, I think that's a very good question, in the sense that I think definitely the feeling after was very positive. So, I mean, the initiative was very well received. But I think the question is important because, for example, one of the challenges that we faced was for the local council, even funding, so to close the square, so they had to close the square to traffic. Just to close the square to traffic, there is a fee that they have to pay. They have to pay for police to be present and so on and so forth. That for them is a significant part of their budget. So they have, I don't know, funds to do this 5 times a year. So you can understand at the level of local councils from a capacity point of view, how critical even small things like this can be. And in that sense, of course, you know, doing that every Sunday, therefore, becomes a completely different challenge, because where do they find the funding to support even just simple road closures of that kind? In that sense, I think the challenges with the capacity available to councils is huge. You know, I mean, from other experiences we had, and I'm listening to Camille speak about parking, for example, you know, it's quite impressive the amount of pressure that they face for things like that, and very often the limits to resources that they have to deal with in terms of their own knowledge capacity, their own in-house capacity to deal with even the simplest sometimes requirements. You know, somebody in administration to even write an email sometimes to a department can be a challenge from some experiences we've had, and therefore, of course, they face an uphill battle. And then they face an uphill battle as well. I think Maria's question is very relevant in terms of the feedback from people. So we've had projects where we present an idea to a local council and they actually decide to, and we convince them to float it with the public. Maria was involved in this one, in fact. And there were people in the audience saying, "Tell me where you want me to sign up to this. I'll support it now. If you put out a piece of paper, I'll sign it." You know, and then the council never did anything with that, because they knew that the people in that room were supportive, but probably they knew that they would face a big backlash from other people who were not in the room at the time. who are not in favor. So those are always challenges to face. I mean, at the same time with the Sicignano project, while we ran the project, at the same time the council was having a workshop with local residents, and of course those who lived on the square were interested in being able to park on, to continue to be able to park on the square, not to have their garages obstructed even on the Sunday. You know, I can't get to my house with my car on the Sunday, even though I live there. So these remain sort of very local territorial challenges in a way, I think. And in that sense, of course, awareness is key, because I think the beautiful thing about tactical urbanism is it allows you to show that things can be different, and then with that to create the momentum to allow those things to take place. I mean, one of the other big experiences for me from the Sicignano workshop was that at one point somebody who lived on the square said, "But why should we have a public space here after all?" I won't go into detail, but who will come here? I wouldn't want my child anyway playing outside in that square with these strangers, you know. And that to me reflects very critically as well the importance of public space as a place to meet others. I mean, the other who is different from me, because today that doesn't happen anymore, you know, when everyone is behind the screen. And that's, I think, in that sense, tactical urbanism and the point about diversity that Giulia made, I think are very important, in that it allows you to try things out and to show people that things can be different in a cheap and effective way.
So I think what's interesting, I mean, we're talking about tactical urbanism. So we're talking about how do we try to do things temporary as a start to experience sort of change and to sort of see that we can use spaces in a different way. And we've mentioned the process. So we need support in terms of the process, or processes which allow us maybe to change that space temporarily from a car use space to a pedestrian, so that it can be painted or it can be temporarily be used for other means. But that also requires funding and maybe also knowledge support. So taking local councils through the process. So helping them, almost hand-holding. And this is where maybe I would like to go into the funding mechanism. So Brian, you were mentioning obviously funding, which is quite maybe typical. So it's usually where we know what projects we want, we have a space, maybe we've managed to get support. You mentioned also voluntary support to help design it, and that's fine, and we have funding mechanisms in place to help us with that. I mean, possibly in your project, it might have been useful also to have funding mechanisms which help with the initial processes, or in these cases, so helping the local councils in doing things temporarily. So like you were saying, Jacques, the permit. So let's say funding mechanisms where a local council can say, okay, I want to do this event, 5 times in the year to trial it out. And on that, and have funding for the expertise to help them do it, to negotiate with the different authorities, and funding expertise to trial, to test, and not just sort of funding already when a concrete project exactly what you want to do. I mean, I want to ask Brian, what do you think about this? Would this have helped you in your project to have this kind of funding? So not just for the implementation of a project, but for the process. And Zoe J, in terms of the regional councils, can regional councils be a support in supporting local councils or developing these kind of funding mechanisms, so that there are these recognized schemes where we can recognize tactical urbanism or placemaking techniques and fund them as a fully funded process?
Yes, our experience with these projects, maybe obviously we are an NGO and we operate from an NGO. So I know it would be different if somebody in the private sector is trying to do this or that. But in a volunteering aspect, we do find a lot of people, a lot of professionals who support us. So really, our activities, our projects actually start very much from volunteers. Okay, so we actually now putting a price on volunteer work, a minimal price of €5 an hour. And then you begin to realize that all this volunteering adds up to thousands of euros, even at a low price of €5 an hour. And I think as an experience for us as an NGO, it really, we began to realize the value of volunteering in such projects. And it is a way of funding as well these projects, especially in the beginning, and getting the idea, the concept going, and even seeking expert advice. So we find a lot of people who help us in that. The other thing is when I think we are developing a project and project ideas, we are also at the same time looking for funding. You know, they go a bit hand in hand. You know, you cannot develop a project if you're not looking at how you're going to fund it or how you're going to make this sustainable. I have to say about funding here in Malta, my experience, maybe a bit different abroad, is we have a lot of maybe, or we have more than, other than a lot, we have more on capital funding, and we don't look into the sustainability of these projects. And I don't think that you have good project management if you're only concentrating on the capital side of a project. So I was hearing people about developing urban spaces, you know, that, and I see a lot of this, but I think what is important is also thinking about how are you going to develop the community to use and make the space available and active for the people. So I think community development and developing urban spaces would go hand in hand together. So in our project, what we're trying to do is precisely involving the community from the beginning, from the development, and we're looking into the sustainability of the project from the design concept. You know, I think that is bringing all these areas and this is where we need to look for funding. And I think we need to make a bit the authorities more aware that it is not a matter of, you know, changing a space, but actually is how the people are going to use the space. So you mentioned earlier education. I think education is key, but education also, from our experience, is it has to be where the people are involved in their own education. It's not somebody telling them what to do and kind of only teaching them, but education today is an experience. It's giving people an experience and the space to learn. So with our young people, with our children, what we want is to give them an experience in our place. I just give a little example of one of the ideas that came up by our young people, you know. At the moment, there's no electricity in the space, and we're trying to leave the space off the grid, again, to learn about nature, the respect to nature, and that. We're trying to build the place without using cement. Okay, now that is a challenge. We found this, you know, you were talking about obstacles. I'm not sure about the word obstacles, but I prefer challenges, you know, because then you have to work to overcome that challenge. But just one idea is, you know, is kind of, even when children will come there, they have to work to get water. So the idea is not to use electrical pumps, but to use mechanical pumps, so that children can learn, you know, the value of water and what it means to. So when I was a child, we had these mechanical pumps in every garden, in every home nearly, you know, but today, children living in urban areas not only do not have these pumps, they don't even have trees. They don't know. Some children, we did some research during COVID in this project, and we met children living in urban areas where they never saw certain fruit grow on trees. So they cannot imagine what it means to see and to cut a fruit and whatever. So our idea is to give education through experience. I think this is very important, even in these projects.
I do, and in fact, I want to, we'll soon open up questions to the audience. In fact, I'm also seeing Liane Kassar, and she's got a question, or she's joining the conversation in the chat from the Local Council Association. But before I do that, I would like to also, you know, discuss the Slow Streets initiative, in fact, with that as an experience-based kind of idea. But maybe, Zoe, did you want to just add to this idea about, you know, the funding mechanisms and how funding mechanisms can maybe be used to create experience for people and make people part of the experience and more part of the process. And maybe also, I don't know if you also have experience in relation to the slow streets and working with the local council association.
Yeah, so I would always encourage anyone who has an idea for a public space within their locality to approach their local and regional council about it. And this is simply because funding opportunities for the local councils, they come up very sort of quickly and very suddenly. And it's actually very helpful for them if people approach them with their ideas. And especially, you know, the local councils and the regional councils can help an idea go from being a seed to being a fully formed idea. And then that's something that can be kept until the correct funding opportunity becomes available. Just to give everyone here an idea of the structure, the environment officer isn't the only officer that the regional councils have. We also have officers in culture, IT, waste, and then really importantly, EU projects and project management. And these officers, we're employed because to work in our respective areas of expertise in order to support the local councils with this. Of course, for example, my expertise, to translate it into a Maltese context, I'm highly dependent on communities and NGOs who have been working in the Maltese context a lot longer than I have. And whenever I'm approaching NGOs and even other stakeholders within the region and communities, I always want to find out what their interest in the region is and what kind of projects and ambitions they would have within the region, because these are things that I can take to the local councils and say, like, you know, someone's mentioned this to me. What do you think of the idea? Do you think it's applicable to our community? Would you be interested in exploring it a bit more? And, you know, that really starts getting the ball rolling. In relation to the Slow Streets project, I'm really excited actually, because me and Leanne have been working together to look at sort of introducing temporary events similar to what Jack was saying. I mean, similar, you know, we have the same barriers. The funding to do it requires quite a lot of funding just to do a temporary pedestrianization event. But you know, if we can get them up and running, and I'm almost sure we will, it gives us an opportunity to create demand for events like this. And once we create demand, the pressure is then on for other government agencies and central government to provide the funding for it. And even in fact, private entities as well, they can become an option to help. You know, a lot of companies, especially big private companies within Malta, they have their corporate, social and environmental and governance where, you know, they want to improve their public image, and these also present opportunities for them. But first of all, you have to demonstrate that there is a demand, and then it will make them, you know, it will make them look better essentially. So it's starting off small. As Giulia said, you know, she started off with test things, and that's what we're looking at doing really here, and, you know, to build up on the Slow Streets thing. But I mean, I would really like for Leanne to maybe give people a bit more of an overview of the Slow Street stuff if she feels up to it, because I think it's a really, really great initiative by the local council association, and I think it's a really, really great place for us to start really looking at our urban spaces and how we can use them differently.
Definitely. Yes, I mean, Leanne, I'm seeing it's really nice to have you here in the audience. It's great to have somebody from the local council association. And I think with the Slow Streets, I mean, one of the things I would be really interested, I mean, seen the studies, and I think, you know, we're seeing the idea of this tactical urbanism and trying to, you know, intervene in streets. And maybe it's interesting to see sort of the community aspect to it, you know, how local councils maybe are planning to involve the community as part of this process. And based on this, of what we're talking about, experience and involving the community from the first steps, you know, for also this idea of creating more awareness and education.
Yes, sure. First of all, thanks for the opportunity. I'm here as well because I'm acting Deputy Executive Secretary of the Port region. So I'm working with Zoe. So currently I'm representing Piazze and the regional port. However, Slow Streets, we did all the studies. it wasn't easy because every locality has its own characteristics, basically. I think our first challenge is the mentalities, the culture that we are used to, because obviously when you're touching parkings, bays in front of homes, when you're touching, I mean, accessibility, you will have feedback, and sometimes it's negative feedback from residents, because we are used to parking the car in front of the door, just open the door and go into the car. So I think our first priority is to start introducing this culture within our localities. We try to get, I mean, we are trying to get people on board. In fact, all studies were vetted, were consulted by ROTA, by CRPD, so that we, by ERA, so that we put stakeholders on board of such studies in order, obviously, to make them more feasible to implement them. However, yes, there are some issues with residents, because they fear that parking will be reduced, etc. However, our main another challenge is the financing aspect of the project. It's quite a huge project. It's basically on 42 localities, so it's on a national level. So definitely, local councils need the support from the central government. We are constantly on lobbying with the central government, but definitely the central government, we did our part, we did the studies together with the regional councils, because regional councils paid for the studies. But obviously we need government intervention in order to start implementing, because obviously, as some of you might know, the allocation given to local councils will be directly to certain tasks, such as waste collection, etc. So definitely the local council do not have the necessary capacity in order to implement, not even financially, but also in human resources wise. So these were the main challenges. And obviously we are still communicating to try to get this fund. In fact, even in the political manifesto, it was implemented in certain ways. So we are quite, we have a positive attitude that somehow we are going to start implementing the project very soon.
Okay, that's really great to hear, because after having seen, you know, some of the studies, it's you know, something I'm really interested, you know.
Yes, I have shared the website
yes, I saw
link
the thing, yes.
with all the studies there. The studies are
Yes.
all uploaded there.
So for everyone who's following in the chat, you can find the link to the Slow Streets project, which Leanne has kindly shared with us. At this point, I would really like to start opening up the discussion to everyone who is listening in. There are a number of other participants, and if you have any questions for our panel, or would like to pass a comment or, you know, an observation or anything, we would be happy to hear other views or experiences, and maybe others following, you know, who are also involved in these ideas or these kind of projects, who would like to say something. Anyone? Or maybe some other comments from the panelists in the meantime, or Wendy?
Yes, in fact, we have another comment from Steve. Steve, would you like to speak up, or shall I relate it?
Either way, it doesn't make too much of a difference. I can just go for it though.
Yes, go for it.
So my question is the one that I just posted in the chat. So I was involved in this, in the Safe Routes to School project, with kind of engaged by Ben Camille through the Project Eagle Foundation. But just to take the kind of discussion just a bit wider, since it's turned into these issues of funding and public engagement and sort of citizen engagement. In relation to funding, I don't know if any of the projects presented today, so the 4 projects and the 4 initiatives presented today, if there was any consideration of public-private partnerships to benefit in funding. So for example, just kind of thinking top of my head is when there's a public space that's adjacent to, I don't know, let's say a commercial activity or residential development, that increases prices of the residences. It also provides spaces for, let's say, outdoor catering areas, thinking kind of the application process for tables and chairs and whatnot. So I feel like all of these projects have been related to funding from either EU funding or various government funding, various kind of public funding. But I just want to, if the panelists can consider about the sustainability of this type of funding for these type of projects, should we then be looking of how we can be moving into more, let's say, sustainable funding streams for these type of projects?
Is it okay if I answer?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Right.
Thank
So
you.
yes, absolutely. I 100% agree. And just over the last couple of months, I've started approaching private companies, businesses within the Port region, and I've been talking to them more about the environment in the Port region, and asking them if they would be on board to collaborate on things like research, for example, because if we're going to have a roadmap, that's going to require research. We need data in order to make sure that we head in the right direction. And like Brian was saying, that the projects that we undertake will have longevity, and they will last for generations. They won't be things that will just last like the next 5-10 years, for example. So and I'm getting really positive responses so far. So I'm really happy to say that it's a very, very good thing to consider. And I'm not sure that with cafes at the moment following COVID is the right place to start. For sure, I would go for kind of the big bad boys with the spare change in the pocket, the ones I mean. But yeah, for sure, the opportunity is there, and these organizations as well, they're willing. You just have to be bold enough to ask the question. I hope that answered your question.
Yes,
Right.
maybe I just add, and having a good proposal, because you cannot go with a half-baked proposal.
Camille?
Yeah, also.
Okay. Go ahead. I don't know. Brian, you were speaking?
Or Steve, I think you were going to answer, or no?
Okay, so otherwise
Yes.
I can go. I think, for example, of the Safe Routes to School, like what we did, it was, okay, so we had this idea, so we had like this funds for VO organization. So we said, okay, let's apply, and then it was successful. So we went to see the local council to say, hey, we have fund, we have these good proposals. Do you want to support us? And they were, okay, if you do everything and we just have to support you with permits, we can do this. So this is how we got it and how it worked. But now, this is now I finished the project, and now I'm trying to find like new, there is no, so how do I continue to sustain? Because I would like to continue the Safe Routes to School. So I need to find new funding. And this is, and also I think NGOs are like local councils, and we are also lacking resources. So we are spending our time either looking for funding or looking for or implementing projects. And this is something that I could consider as like going to now to involve, because now we have also a showcase. We can show what we've done. So we have a pilot and pictures to show this is what we've done. So we have also some results, some feedback from the parents, from the school, from the local council, where then we can approach like the business community and say, do you want to continue to support this project? And also something else that I have, so let's say if just going back not to the Safe Routes to School project, but if we want to close the space and to do those temporary events, instead of painting the floors right immediately, maybe we can close and we can invite food truck, or we can invite, I don't know, beer company, just to say, okay, so we're giving you the space, we would just install benches and tables, and then we don't pay you, but you can sponsor this, because you will make you will make revenues, because we will just offer you a space and invite people to come, and through the rent, because you will use the space, maybe this could also sponsor the event. So we can also start very small and very very low key with this kind of projects, where we can find this hybrid, where like the business can also pay. They can use the space, and they can also give revenue to close, like to pay for the policeman, like the police, to make sure to redirect traffic, and for the permits as well. So this could be also
an interesting idea. Yes. I'm just going to go to the chat. We have another question from Maria Tard. She's saying, so since local councils can present bylaws and make laws for their localities, would it be possible for some champion local councils to implement such measures, which would include parking management? I know it's a tall order, but take up Hamrun and their idea of the pedestrianization of high road. So would anyone like to maybe address this, or would it be possible for a local council to champion such ideas through the use of bylaws and making laws for their own localities?
So I think it's possible. I also think that the local councils ultimately represent the communities that they serve. And if that is not what the community is asking for, then it's not going to be what is done. Which is why these temporary pedestrianization events are so important, because if you don't show people the potential of what this could mean, and you know, this is another way in which we want to collaborate more with grassroots initiatives and local NGOs and communities. You know, we want to invite them into these temporary pedestrianization spaces, give them incentive to come along and, you know, host events and make the space inviting and, you know, meet with people again. So I think this is a demand that we can create over time, and once the demand is there, for sure the councils will act on it. But first of all, you have to have the demand, because ultimately they do answer to the communities that they represent.
I totally agree. So it's really about creating demand. In fact, this is also one of the idea behind this webinar series and behind even the platform of Dawra Madwarna, is to create this constant discussion and try and facilitate and trigger, you know, and act as a catalyst to trigger these kind of, you know, opportunities and experiences and this kind of discussion. Steve, I see you have your hand raised. Would you like to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I just want to exactly bounce off what Zoe just mentioned. Also, I feel Giulia mentioned it in her presentation as well, is once you have the launch event, so what we, like one of a very memorable moment, in the Safe Routes to School project was in the launch event when we were walking with the kids along the path. So it was maybe a group of 15 to 20 kids, 4 groups of 15 to 20 kids. We're walking around. One of the interactions that I would never forget is we're crossing like one of the main roads of Nashar, and the person in the car would stop like maybe 200 meters at the zebra crossing before the kids even get to it. You know, the kids are smiling and saying bonjour to all of the people in the car, and the person in the car, everyone is waving, and there was just this just great moment, you know, how we always think of this like eternal conflict between people that are walking and between cars, whereas, you know, people in cars are people as well, and everyone's just smiling and walking and saying bonjour to each other. So it's very much this, like, creating awareness through actually people's smiles on the streets, you know, this as well, what Jack was mentioning, it's about meeting people in the streets and just smiling and waving and saying bonjour and saying hello and crossing the road. So that's the power that these projects can have, and showing the full potential of having our roads as open spaces.
Definitely. Okay, I think at this point we have one last question. I'm just looking at the time, sort of we're nearing the end of the time allocated for the webinar, and we have one more question in the chat from Noel de Bono. So I'm going to go to that, and then maybe we can do a round of comments, last comments, and sort of start to close off. So Noel is asking, Noel was one of the panel participants we had in our first webinar, and she's saying another challenge raised in previous webinars is that of investment in public spaces which remain underutilized despite the upgrading of the area. I am not aware whether the reason for this outcome has been assessed. However, it would be interesting to hear whether the Milan efforts have had similar experiences before to find the right spots or areas. So I think the question here is sort of, you know, have you had spaces where you've tried to do something but then they remain underutilized despite the upgrading? You know, was it a challenge to find the right areas, or did people take to the areas straight away? I think maybe you can answer, Giulia.
I think for the, like, in general, probably is a big issue to understand where you want to implement something. But with the concept of the Piazze Aperte program was exactly the inverse. So we were asking people where they wanted the interventions. So that was basically a win-win, because we were sure that in this specific place, people really wanted that square. And we also assured that there was a calendar of event and the activation and everything. So we, of course, you are never 100% sure, because then you have to try, and that's the power of testing. But if you really listen to communities and ask them for their needs and work on places that are very filled by people, then probably you don't have this problem, or maybe it's really very small percentage.
Okay, so I think what I'd like to do, I'd like to just ask all the panelists at this point to just maybe give one sentence, a quick round, okay, of just one sentence, what you've taken from the discussion as a way forward. What should we focus on, okay? What is the, the key success, let's say, factor? Just a key sentence from everyone, and then we wrap up. Maybe Camille?
Sure. I think what was for me, I think from what everyone has said, I could recognize like the same struggles or the same aspirations. So I think we're all facing like the same challenges and in Malta. But I think also as a way forward, I think like those streets could be like the umbrella for testing tactical urbanism in Malta, and the different work that we're doing with the Safe Routes to School or with the Don Bosco, like reconnecting nature, like educating through experience to kind of motivate and to engage the citizens could also help and should contribute to the Safe Routes to School. So we only have one umbrella, and we're all pushing to the same efforts to slowly exchanging the culture of the care in Malta and experiencing and creating this demand for better public space and nature as well in our cities.
Jacques?
Yeah, I think it's very consistent. No, it's raise awareness, create demand in that sense. I think that seems to be the bottom line with most of these issues.
Brian?
I would say that community involvement, community development is a very important part, getting people involved. So in that way you can create awareness, and also then providing, as I said before, education through experience.
Zoe? Jay?
I think the positioning of these projects is going to be really, really, really important. I think schools make fantastic targets because, ultimately the kids are the next generation and they have massive influence on their parents as well. I really love the point that Brian made much earlier, when he was saying if you put €5 against every volunteer hour, as much as I really want NGOs and communities really involved in local council projects, I also don't want to be asking people to be working too much for free, because it's not fair. So I think also it's going to be important as part of this to make sure that when grassroots and communities are getting involved, that it's incentivized and that there is something for them as part of this. Yeah, I think those are my key takeaways.
Thank you. And one last one from Giulia, maybe, and then
yeah, I think for me it was really inspiring to see all your projects and to see that somehow in the world we are all going into the same direction. So this gives us a lot of strength. And it was also very powerful, the sentence of Brian that said the kids, they don't know how the fruit grows on the trees, and that we should really focus on learning in expertise. And I think this is something that I will carry with me for the next project. And thank you everyone, really.
Thank you, Giulia. Yeah, and in fact, even though we had very different projects, and Brian, maybe yours was, more in the rural area and really trying to get in touch with nature. I think it really is another stepping stone to trying to bring that nature back into the urban communities. And then there is that demand for nature in these, for these tactical urbanism projects to become more permanent and more green and more natural. Wendy, as our you've been listening to the conversation, and maybe you want to sum up, and we'll end and we'll close off.
Very briefly, I loved that message of let's trial it. And it takes energy and it takes motivation, and post-pandemic, we're low on both. But I think to come together, I think the messages we can take from this webinar is to come together will, join our energies and just trial it, because if it works, then it stays. If it doesn't, then we change it. And I loved how we can learn from best practice, just bring science into this and make it very scientific, the way that we take whatever works and then we apply that. And I think this community, Daura Madwana, is all about that. It's all about applying these principles and just taking that approach and looking at what works, working with communities and moving forward. So in a nutshell, I think, yes, let's go for it.
Thank you, Wendy. So I just want to close off by saying, first of all, thank you to everyone who has been following, and thank you for all the panelists for their time here today and for the discussion and enthusiastic discussion. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a webinar series. So following this, me and Wendy will be sitting down and racking our heads, okay, what next? What came out of it and what next? But I think we already have some ideas, and something which has been coming up, recurringly, and we know it's an issue, is obviously parking and transport and mobility, and how do we try to create that better balance. And also we've been mentioning and discussing a lot the grassroots initiatives, but also there is the need for coordinated studies in some of these topics and more integrated plans of how these different aspects come together. And I know that the Local Council Association is working a lot on this. So Leanne, I will be maybe getting in touch, and I'm thinking that it would be really nice, even maybe in the build up to maybe Mobility Week or over the summer, to maybe try and discuss really what you are working on. I know you are doing a lot, and try and showcase some of the local councils, associations work in terms of the studies and all these studies which are being done, and have this discussion together. So
thank you. Yes, sure. We're working even on guidelines for local councils. So our next guidelines will be issued related to parking.
Yes, good, fantastic. So I hope that for this discussion we can involve more the Local Council Association and the study and work which is being done there. Thank you to everyone, and I wish everyone a good evening.